Welcome to GeoStream's ESG State of Play podcast. I'm Justin Vela. For years, there's been this idea that trends which start in California spread out across the US and take hold in other states. And I'm going to talk through a couple of these issues going ES and G. First, a couple quick reminders. California has the largest population in the US. More than 39.6 million people live here, including me. I'm speaking with you from San Francisco. California looks set to become the world's fourth largest economy. We'll find that out when new figures are published next year. It's also home to a lot of innovation. Think all those tech companies in Silicon Valley. And dropping us into the environment section of this podcast, is all those forest fires. We won't dwell here too long. California's got horrendous forest fires. They're known all over the world as a symbol of a planet becoming just too warm. Many people point to them as what the future could more broadly look like in different locations around the world. Fire, drought, you name it, doesn't look good. What we do want to focus on is California having passed rules that effectively ban the sale of new gas-powered vehicles by 2035. I say effectively banning because the state wants a gradual scale down in gas-powered cars, and then they're only going to find the car makers that don't comply. You can also still buy and sell used gas-powered vehicles after 2035. Personally, I think a lot of that is going to happen. Still, the decision is big. Actually, Laurie and I are planning an entire episode on EVs. We'll aim to have that out in a couple of weeks. You know, there's a lot to think about when you own one of these. Are you going to go, to your brother-in-law's house and ask to plug it in overnight? What are you going to say if your brother-in-law says, well, how much is that going to run on my electrical bill? Still, if you think about how important the decarbonization of the transport sector is, and the transport sector is one of the main sources, or rather the main source of California's emissions, then the rules are pretty great. And so will other states follow California with this? Yes, potentially 16 states are likely to follow with similar laws. Think, New York, Washington State. So with this EV law, California is definitely a leader. Of course, will it actually be able to phase out gas-powered cars by 2035? That's a different question. You've got, the high cost of purchasing these vehicles. I can tell you that it's very expensive, painfully so. And even with the different tax break schemes that are available to, support the adoption of these vehicles, it's still expensive to buy one. There's also the lack of charging stations. And if you consider the relatively low range of these vehicles, that's also pretty painful and, doesn't make people feel particularly secure about driving long distances. Another thing to think about is if California's electrical grid can really keep up. There's already a lot of pressure on it. Sometimes it doesn't perform that well. Imagine that many more people plugging in to charge. Okay. Another thing that could get in the way of adoption is just the fact is like the whole kind of social proof thing. I'm not talking, S as in, the S in ESG here. I'm talking about the fact that even as an EV owner, I actually know relatively few other people that own one. And keep in mind that I live in San Francisco, where it's simply no problem to charge these things. You're obviously going to be a lot more willing to buy an EV if you know someone that already has one. Luckily, 2035 is still pretty far off. What really does stand out is the number of business opportunities, both for established companies and even private individuals. If anyone can get a lot of chargers up around highways, there's a lot of potential for that to pay off. Okay, now we're going to move on to the S, the Me Too movement. It's a phenomenon that started in Hollywood in 2017 and spread not only across the United States, but internationally as well. 22 states have since passed workplace safety laws, and the broader societal consequences have been huge. This is a subject that will continue to be one step forward, two steps back for a long time. But there's more of a willingness to speak out against people that use their positions of power to abuse others in the United States than ever before. California is now back in the center of Me Too, with former Hollywood director Harvey Weinstein on trial in Los Angeles. Allegations against Weinstein sparked the entire movement in 2017, and he's been convicted and jailed in New York, though incredibly, he could win an appeal there and go free. This makes the case in LA particularly high stakes in terms of keeping this guy locked away. The trial has involved testimony from Jennifer Siebel Newsom, the wife of recently re-elected California Governor Gavin Newsom, a man many expect to be a future Democratic presidential candidate. Sibyl Newsom testified that she had been raped by Weinstein in a hotel in Los Angeles. She's considered the most prominent woman to testify in court against Weinstein so far. That such a prominent individual testified will not only refocus attention on Me Too, but sets the stage for these issues to be discussed much more openly in the future. The Newsoms are definitely a couple willing to speak openly about difficult social topics. Understanding the pair and their beliefs will be important for thinking about the future of the Democrats and how their policies will track. Now, on to governance, the G in ESG. The big thing in governance right now is data, how to control data, how to manage data, how to get it around to places where you can control and manage it better. And of course, consumers want their privacy protected when it comes to data. So already back in 2018, California passed the Consumer Privacy Act. The California Consumer Privacy Act is the full thing. And so it went into effect in 2020. It gave California consumers 5 new privacy rights. 1, to know what personal information is collected about them. 2, whether and to whom their personal information is sold or disclosed, and the ability to opt out of its sale. 3, the ability to access their collected personal information. 4, to demand a business delete their personal information. And 5, to not be discriminated against for exercising their rights under the CCPA. This was a big deal, and other states did follow with discussions around consumer privacy and how to create opt-outs for people who wanted more control over their personal data. Here's a couple examples of what followed. There was the Colorado Privacy Act, signed into law in July 2021. It'll go into effect in July 2023. There was the Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act, signed March 2021, goes into effect in January 2023. We'll also mention here that California actually passed an additional privacy act called the California Privacy Rights Act of 2020. This goes into effect in 2023 and essentially expands the CCPA. Other states have also had conversations around data privacy. Alaska, New York, Oklahoma, Florida. Unfortunately, all these states have not succeeded in passing consumer privacy acts as of right now, but the conversation continues. The conversation also continues at a national level as well. There's legislation being discussed that would put in place a federal level privacy act, which would be huge. Keep an eye out for that in the next year. A trend to watch when it comes to data is how firms will position opt-ins rather than opt-outs. A few years ago, companies tended to focus on a very liberal approach to data collection, essentially trying to get as much as they could, and then also that same type of approach in terms of dissemination or sharing data. Today, there's a shift towards companies getting consumers to opt in, with firms needing to express the value consumers gain from handing over their data in order to get that opt-in. You can expect some clever positioning and even more clever marketing language around that trade-off of value versus personal privacy. Of course, firms will still need to control and manage all that data, and they'll also need to be able to respond to requests related to it. So get good at spreadsheets, get good at querying data, and get good at moving data around all over the place. Until next time, this is the ESG State of Play podcast. Thanks for listening.